did you know that U.S. shellfish supplies are projected to decrease by over 40% by the year 2100? That's right, oysters and other shellfish around the world are dying out due to ocean acidification. Today, we're diving into this problem to see why oysters are dying out and how we can help save them. Along the way, we'll talk with an expert, analyze scientific data, and even go to a real NC oyster nursery to find a solution to this dire problem. You might be wondering, what exactly is ocean acidification?
Ocean acidification is a widespread issue that is caused by global warming and CO2 entering the water.
When the carbon dioxide gets absorbed by the ocean, it causes a chemical reaction which creates carbonic acid. The added acidity changes our ocean's pH. Over the past 50 years, our waters have become 18% more acidic.
So how does this affect oysters?
A major side effect of creating carbonate acid is that it depletes the ocean's supply of carbonate ions. Oyster larvae, aka oyster spat, need carbonate ions to grow their strong shells, but due to ocean acidification, there just aren't getting enough of that.
When you combine weak shells with the current projected acidity of the ocean, problems such as stunted growth and high mortality rates become more and more of a problem.
Why should I care?
Oysters are important for multiple reasons. In the wild, they are a keystone species for inshore ecosystems that filter huge amounts of water per day.
They're the backbones of many local economies, so if their population crashes, everyone will have to pay the full price.
Are adult oysters affected as well?
The short answer is yes, but adult oysters will not be as affected as oyster spat do. They will still suffer from the same high stress rates and weak shells, but research shows that they will not suffer from the same high mortality rates that oyster spat do. This graph was published back in 2023 by the Journal of Experimental Biology. It measures the mortality rate of C. gigas, the Pacific oyster, and O. adulis, the European flat oyster, based on the pH levels and how long they were exposed to these conditions in the given study. The red line in part C shows that both species end up dying at around 6.62 pH. But a key thing to notice is that our pH is only expected to drop to around 7.7 pH. This isn't to say that the change in pH is unimportant, but instead that both C. gigas and O. adulis can and will be able to tolerate these changes as adults. To learn more, we interviewed Dr. Janet Nye. She's an associate professor at UNC who heads the Nye Lab out at Morehead City. Have you noticed a certain species be mostly affected by ocean acidification more than others, especially around maybe fish?
Although ocean acidification does affect fish, the biggest effect is probably going to be through the food web. So when the shellfish are not as abundant, or the pteropods that the fish eat are not as abundant, that has really huge effects on everything else in the food web that eats them. For fish, when they're exposed to low pH, when they're in the egg or larval phase, that can really affect their mortality. So they have higher mortality when they're exposed to in the young stages. But when they get older, fish have these special cells that allow them to deal with differences in pH.
And one of the things we heard was that ocean acidification isn't as much of a problem here in the mid-Atlantic compared to out in the Northwest. Is that true? And could you elaborate about that a bit?
One reason is because the water's not as cold here. So, when a liquid is cold, it absorbs more gases, which might be a little bit counterintuitive. But if you think about a can of Coke, right? And you want the can of Coke to be cold, so it has lots of bubbles in it. That's because cold water absorbs more gas. So that's why northern waters are more sensitive to this ocean acidification, because they're absorbing more.
On top of that, the ocean acidification that NC oyster farmers are experiencing might not actually be ocean acidification, but instead its cousin, a very similar problem called coastal acidification.
Coastal acidification is caused by river runoff, eutrophication, and algal blooms. Here in the mid-Atlantic, it seems that coastal acidification is a major problem for shellfish farmers.
We visited Susan with Down East Mariculture, a family-owned oyster nursery based in Williston, North Carolina.
So a little bit about the history of the building. This was a clam house originally, and it was started by Elmer and Wesley Willis back in 1939, and they lived right here in Williston. Before World War II, Elmer got a contract with Heinz Seafood to produce clams for Campbell's Clam Chowder, but after World War II, he got the exclusive.
Elmer passed away in the 70s and the building went to rot. Susan bought the property in 2015 and then rebuilt it.
And we didn't know what we were going to do with it, and one night we went to a meeting at Seamast with NC State, and somebody from Sea Grant said, what we need in North Carolina is an oyster nursery, and I just said, then I'm going to do an oyster nursery. And I went home and told my husband, and he said, do you know how to do an oyster nursery? And I was like, no, but we'll figure it out.
They've been in business for 9 years now, and they grow oyster spat and clam spat for the NC mariculture industry. So how do you guys grow your oyster spat?
Okay, well, sometimes we begin with larvae. Sometimes we just buy small seed from hatcheries. So if we buy larvae, we hope we're getting them at the pedibelliger stage, which is where they have their little foot and they're ready to settle down. We have a setting room in the back, which you all have been through. We have screens that are 150 microns. And then we have microcults that are 300 microns, and we condition them for about 24 hours in 1 micron filtered seawater. And then we spread a thin layer over the little silos. And then we evenly divide the larvae that we've brought in. We usually bring in 5 million at a time throughout the 18 silos that we have. We wash them every day, gently, very gently. We feed them twice a day with shellfish diet 1800 that we get from California. And this time of year it's too cold for them, so they like 81 degrees, and they like a pH of 8.2, and they love a salinity of 27. We try to mimic those conditions, so we have heating rods that we put in the water, and most of the other things just take care of themselves. So after about 48 hours, we'll drain down and put them into a clean tank and repeat the process, feeding them twice a day. We come in every morning and kind of gently scrape around the sides of the silo because they do want to stick to the silo. And then after 10 days, we sieve them off, the spat off, and then we move them into our grow out tanks on very slow flow, and we put a 200 micron salt filter over the water coming in just to keep any critters out there coming in to eat our babies. And then after about 2 weeks, we take the salt filter off and go full blast, and they just grow.
When we talked with Susan, she mentioned that there were multiple years where they had problems with the water.
Just this year, Down East Mariculture is dealing with water problems. Susan buys larvae from a hatchery in Virginia to add larvae she grows herself to grow as much oyster spat as possible.
The hatchery in Virginia is currently seeing a huge number of the larvae dying out, but there hasn't been an official diagnosis. The symptoms mirror ocean acidification and coastal acidification, but Susan says that no one has found an official cause.
Down East faced another water problem a few years ago where the water was too salty. Without a proper way to fight the region-wide salinity, the whole industry slowed to a snail's pace.
You might be wondering, what are some general solutions?
There are a lot of different ways that you can fight ocean acidification. For the public, it's recommended that you fight ocean acidification the same way you'd fight climate change. This means reducing greenhouse gas emissions by carpooling, public transportation, and using clean energy solutions.
For shellfish farmers, one of the most supported strategies is by buffering the pH of the water. This was done in a study led by George Walbuster of Oregon State University. A fun fact is that we actually tried to contact him for an interview, but unfortunately he declined. In the study, researchers took 4 water samples between 2014 and 2015. They then split each water sample into 2, and they grew oyster spat on both sides. On one side, they added calcium carbonate and buffered the pH, but on the other side, they left as a control.
They measured the survival rate of the oyster larvae 48 hours post-fertilization, and the results were shocking. In cohort A, there was a 90% survival rate on the buffered side, but just a 10% survival rate on the controlled side. Additionally, the survival rate was higher on the buffered side in 3 of the 4 cohorts.
You can choose to buffer the pH by adding calcium carbonate, eelgrass, or crushed up oyster shells. And that's the beauty of it. oyster nurseries like Down East Mariculture need to use crushed up oyster shells in the first place, so it's really cool to see them unknowingly fight the problem.
Besides buffering the pH, some other key strategies include using AI to let the water in when it's the right pH and forecasting future pH levels so that farmers can accurately choose when to plant their oyster spat.
In conclusion, ocean acidification is a worldwide problem that primarily affects shellfish, but it also has effects on every single marine animal on the planet. It's a byproduct of climate change that's tanking the shellfish industry. Fortunately, there are many solutions such as buffering the pH, using AI, and forecasting future pH levels.
And finally, we can't thank Susan enough from Down East Mariculture for letting us tour her oyster nursery facility. And also, thanks to Janet and I for letting us interview her for our project.
Thanks for watching. Goodbye.